It started with a letter, just one of those usual notices from the HOA. You know, the kind you roll your eyes at and toss on the kitchen counter. But this one felt different. The wording was aggressive and the tone almost threatening. I didn't think much of it until a few days later when my daughter called me from the driveway, her voice shaking. That's when I looked out the window and saw them. 3 guys on bikes, full leather, just sitting there with their engines rumbling. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, maybe some riders passing through. But then one of them stepped off, walked up to my daughter, and said her name. That's when my heart dropped. Now look, I don't scare easy, but when it comes to my kid, I don't play games. I tried to stay calm, walked outside, and asked what they wanted. The way they looked at me, like they were sizing me up. I knew this wasn't a random visit. Someone sent them, and I had a feeling I knew exactly who. What they didn't know was, I wasn't the kind of guy to be intimidated, not in my own driveway. 3 minutes later, the whole energy changed, and suddenly, the tough guys were backing off, apologizing, even begging me to stop. But it wasn't over yet, not even close. You're probably wondering how an HOA ended up sending bikers to my house. Believe me, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it too. But to really understand what happened, you've got to know what led up to that day. A few weeks before the whole biker incident, I had a run-in with the HOA board. They didn't like that I built a small shed in my backyard. Nothing fancy, just a place to store tools. They said it violated community guidelines, even though half the neighborhood had similar setups. I pushed back, asked for documentation, and suddenly, it felt like I'd stepped on a landmine. Then the fines started showing up. Random, ridiculous charges. One day it was for overgrown grass, even though I'd mowed it the day before. Then it was a complaint about unauthorized landscaping. It didn't make sense. I knew someone was targeting me, but I didn't think they'd go this far. My neighbors started acting weird too, avoiding eye contact, whispering when I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside had me on edge. I kept replaying that moment, my daughter's face when those guys showed up, the way they said her name like it was some kind of threat. I started digging. I wanted to know exactly who was behind this. I pulled up old HOA meeting notes, scanned every letter they'd sent, looked for names I hadn't paid attention to before. One name kept popping up, Bryce Harlan, HOA board president, recently elected, and apparently the one pushing all these new enforcement policies. I'd only met him once, seemed polite on the surface, but there was something smug in the way he talked, like he thought he owned the whole block. I decided to play it smart. No more reacting. I needed to get ahead of this. If Bryce was using the HOA as a front to push people around, I had to find proof, real proof. I started documenting everything. Every fine, every letter, every strange car that slowed down in front of our house. I even set up a couple cameras, not just the usual doorbell stuff, but hidden ones too. And sure enough, within a week, I caught one of the biker guys walking past our driveway at 2 a.m., checking the side gate like he was scoping the place out. I took that footage and went to a lawyer. He didn't say much at first, just nodded and asked for copies. But the look on his face told me everything. Something was off about the whole situation, something deeper than just HOA drama. And right around then, things started escalating. I got a call from my job. Someone had emailed a complaint about me, accusing me of harassment. Totally false. Then my wife's car got keyed while parked outside our house. I couldn't prove it was connected, but come on, too many things lining up too fast. Meanwhile, I kept digging. Found out Bryce's businesses had been sued before. Intimidate knew I was running out of time. With Carl gone and strangers watching my every move, I had to act before things got worse. I gathered everything, videos, documents, screenshots, and sent it to a friend of mine who worked in local media. I didn't plan to go public, but I needed leverage. The same night, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Bryce. His tone had changed. No more smug attitude. He sounded nervous. He said we needed to talk, just the two of us. I agreed, but not without a plan. I wore a mic, had my friend record the whole conversation from a distance. We met at an old parking lot near the edge of the neighborhood. Bryce showed up alone, but something about the way he kept looking around told me he was expecting backup. After everything came out, the neighborhood changed almost overnight. The HOA board was dissolved, and an investigation was launched into the housing board connections. Bryce ended up taking a deal. He turned over names, documents, everything. Turns out, he'd been roped in years ago, thinking it was just business. But once he realized how far it went, it was too late to back out. The fake fines, the scare tactics, even the forced sales, it was all part of a much larger scheme. Our family finally got some peace. No more strange cars, no more threats. My daughter started sleeping better. I even got to rebuild that shed, legally this time, with no one breathing down my neck. And the neighbors? A few who had stayed quiet before came by to thank me. Turns out, I wasn't the only one they'd tried to push out. Looking back, I still don't know why they picked me to start with. Maybe I was just the first one to say no. But here's the thing. I learned fast that when you stand your ground, bullies tend to fold. Even the ones in suits, especially the ones hiding behind fancy titles and HOA rules. You just have to know when to push back and how far you're willing to go. What he didn't expect was that I had already sent everything to the media, and more importantly, to the state attorney's office. I told him that, and for a second, he just stood there in silence. Then he cracked, started rambling about how it wasn't supposed to get this far, and that they would come after both of us now. Asterisk, that's when it hit me. Bryce wasn't the one pulling the strings. The HOA was just a cover. The real operation was something deeper. Money laundering through fake fines, intimidation to push homeowners out, flipping properties for profit. Bryce was just a front man. And the final twist? The biker crew. They weren't thugs. They were off-duty security from a company tied to a shell business owned by someone on the county housing board. So yeah, I shut it down. Authorities got involved, media ran the story, and the whole thing blew up. But even now, sometimes I wonder if taking them down really ended it or just made me their next problem. On tactics, shady contracts, even rumors of extortion. But nobody ever stuck in with anything. People either moved out, gave up, or stayed quiet. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my shed or some grass. This was about control. And if I didn't move fast, I wasn't just risking my property anymore. I was putting my whole family in the crosshairs. Just when I thought I had a grip on things, something happened that flipped everything upside down. One morning, my daughter found an envelope taped to the inside of our back fence, like someone had climbed over just to leave it there. No name, no return address. Inside was a single photo. It was me, sitting at a cafe 2 days earlier, talking to the lawyer. Someone had been following me, watching me. It wasn't just intimidation anymore. They were letting me know I was being tracked. That's when it hit me. This was bigger than just Bryce. I went back through the footage from my cameras, frame by frame, and noticed a pattern. The same black SUV had passed by our house at least 4 times a day for the last week. I hadn't noticed it before, blended right in, but now I couldn't unsee it. And then, a real twist. Carl, the neighbor who'd warned me about Bryce, suddenly moved out overnight. No notice, no goodbye, just gone. I knocked on his door the next morning, and it was empty. The blinds were ripped down, and the lock looked like it had been forced. At that point, I knew I was being boxed in, not just by Bryce, but by something else, something organized. Maybe he wasn't acting alone. Maybe this whole HOA thing was just the surface of something way more dangerous. And the worst part, I still had no idea how deep this really went. I asked around discreetly. A neighbor down the street, a guy named Carl, finally opened up. Said Bryce wasn't just some over-eager board member. He had connections, ran a few local businesses, some legal, some questionable. Word was, he liked to take care of problems his own way. That's when it started making sense. The fake fines, the sudden complaints, the cold shoulders from people who used to wave, they weren't coincidences. They were pressure points. And now, bringing bikers into it, that was next level. I knew I had to do something, but I couldn't go straight at him. Not yet. Not until I understood the full game he was playing. Passed by, it was like I'd been marked. But when they came after my daughter, that crossed a line. The bikers weren't just a scare tactic, they were a message. The weird part, they weren't amateurs. They knew how to intimidate without touching a thing, but what they didn't know was who they were dealing with.